All right, welcome everyone to the Detroit 2030 District Lunch and Learn for June. I'm happy to have everybody here. I'm going to get started just by briefly introducing our three speakers. We're first going to hear from Tom Elliott. He's the Director of Industry Development and Technical Services at the International Masonry Institute. And then we're going to have a presentation by Stephen Crow who is the Smart Building Platform Enablement at Jackson Control. And then lastly, Jana Lake, who is the president of 3R Sustainability. So thank you, everyone. I'm going to get started just by doing a brief introduction and / update on the Detroit 2030 district. Several of you probably heard these updates yesterday at the Energy Challenge breakfast, but let me just share again. So just a reminder to everyone, there are 24 districts across North America, and Detroit is the third largest one. We're the third largest in North America. We have almost 60 million square feet enrolled in our program. And we have 3 districts in Michigan, in Ann Arbor and Grand Rapids as well. And just to summarize again what it is that what we're aiming for, what we're working on, we are a free resource for building owners and managers and helping them reduce their energy consumption and carbon emissions from their buildings, transportation, and also the water consumption of their buildings. So as we've been getting closer to 2030, the 2030 District Network had a summit in Detroit last fall, and together decided to adopt a new goal. It's accelerating to zero beyond 2030. And so the district as a whole agreed that the new goal would be to reduce carbon emissions between 50 to 65% by 2030 and reach zero emissions by 2040. So this is a very new goal adopted by the district. And what does accelerating to zero emissions require? It requires making sure our buildings are as energy efficient as we can, then looking at electrification options and clean grids. So looking at renewable energy as well. And then who are our members? So we have 3 different member types. It's free for our building owners and managers to join. They just sign up as a building member. We also have professional stakeholders. So all of our presenters today are professional stakeholders who pay to belong, who support our work and get behind this mission. And then we also have community stakeholders that are nonprofits in Detroit that are doing a similar work or that partner, collaborate, and support our work. And here's just a few quick stats. So I mentioned we have almost 60 million square feet in the program, which is about 460 buildings. We have 42 companies that support us. We have 7 companies that support all 3 of the 2030 districts in Michigan. And we have 41 of our community stakeholders that are partners with us in this work. And here is our board, which we've got a couple board members here today. So thank you. We also have 3 best practices groups. So these are similar building types that meet quarterly to talk about shared topics, concerns, issues. So these have been very successful. The Venue Museum group, which is now a national group, the museum group is. We have a Houses of Worship group, and we also have a multifamily best practices group. Last month, we celebrated the 2nd cohort of the Houses of Worship treasure hunt participants. So this was a separate program for our Houses of Worship that was actually highlighted by the EPA with the first cohort. So this is a really successful program that supports Houses of Worship during a 6-month period of time on various topics related to their building and sustainability. And then I mentioned earlier, the Detroit Energy Challenge Awards breakfast was yesterday. Several of you were there. So thank you for coming. And we awarded 6 of Detroit's biggest losers. This is the 2nd annual breakfast that we've had, and it's continuing to grow. And we had the new sustainability director from the city of Detroit as our keynote speaker. Just wanted to say thank you to our sponsors. These are our platinum sponsors that support our program, and our funding partners, and to all of our professional stakeholders that support the 2030 district. So there's several ways to join us if you haven't already, but I think most people on the call are already a member in some form. But you can always sign a building into our program that is free, and you can share that with other buildings that you know in Detroit if they want to join. There's opportunities to be an event sponsor, a professional stakeholder, a volunteer. We have some volunteers on the meeting right now, so thank you. And you can continue to follow us on these social media platforms, or also get our monthly newsletter. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tom. And Tom, just let me know when you'd like me to change my screen and our slide, and I'll go to the next slide for you. So welcome, Tom. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Kendall, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to everybody today. And it was nice to meet some of you yesterday at the Detroit Energy Challenge breakfast. As Kendall said, my name is Tom Elliott. I am the Director of Industry Development and Technical Services for the IMI, which is the International Masonry Institute. I live in Ohio, but I cover the states of Ohio, Michigan, Kentucky, and West Virginia for the IMI. Next slide, please. Thanks, Kendall. So we work to build better, right? Our goal is to have contractors, craft workers, and designers that build masonry buildings that deliver efficient, economical, and beautiful masonry systems, also meeting the carbon neutral building requirements that organizations like the Detroit 2030 have in place. Next slide, please. So the IMI, we're nonprofit because we're funded by the bricklayers and allied craft workers and the contractors who employ those craft workers. And those are the union contractors within the industry. We have several programs available for contractors as well as craft workers, and we work on training them in a lot of different fronts. Next slide, please. So when I say bricklayers and allied craft workers, so the allied craft workers are all the trades you see up on the screen there. It's stone setters, masonry restoration, which is the fastest growing sector of our industry. And that was on display at the Michigan Central train station. A lot of our craft workers worked on that building. And we did a lot of we did all of the Guastavino tile repairs there. We put on a training session at our Warren Center to help them learn the art and the craft of Guastavino structural masonry tile work. And that's one of the things we do is we provide training to the craft workers. Tile, marble, terrazzo, rain screen, refractory worker, concrete, plasters. So we basically support all the trowel trades. So it's bricklayers and allied craft workers, and these are the allied craft workers. Next slide. And we like to say the training makes the difference, right? We have over 61 training centers nationwide. There's 2 in Michigan. One is Warren and one is in Lansing. It's a standardized curriculum, and the apprentices receive 6,500 hours of on-the-job and classroom training. A lot of this is specialized training or upgrade training as well. So when you're a BAC member, you start as an apprentice and you work through your career. The training's available to any BAC craft worker throughout the life of their career. So even a 40-year member who wants to get training in sustainability, right? Because the wall systems are changing, the codes are changing, everything's changing within our industry, and it's changing quite dramatically. You have to almost be a building scientist rather than just a craft worker today. And we provide that training to the craft workers as well as the contractors to help them meet the goals like the carbon neutral buildings by 2040. We stay within the industry, and then we relay that to the craft workers and the contractors. Because as you know, with the best design, the best plans and the best materials, if these materials are installed inappropriately or not as they're supposed to be, we could have issues on the building. So you know, carbon neutrality starts with the craft worker on site, you know, and we do everything we can to make sure that they're the best trained hands in the business, but also they have the most knowledge on the various materials and wall systems that are out there. Next slide, please. So some of the services we provide, I said we provide services to contractors and craft workers, but we also provide a lot of services to the design and the construction community. Some of those are plan and specification review. So if an architect's developing a set of drawings or plans, they could send them to us. We'll look at them, second set of eyes, and we'll return them at no cost. We do a lot of job site troubleshooting. Not that anything ever goes wrong on a masonry job, but if it ever does, they'll call us out, we'll look at it, give our recommendations for repairing or fixing the situation, or cite the codes. What maybe it's not a violation, it's within the industry tolerances. We do a lot of continuing education presentations and some hands-on material workshops for the design and the construction community at our training centers. So next slide, please. In the masonry industry, when we talk about the codes, especially trying to meet the energy codes and some of the different system changes out there, the three documents that we refer to and talk to our contractors and craft workers about are the IECC, that's the International Energy Conservation Code. I'm sure everybody's familiar with that. There's the IBC, the International Building Code, but there's also the TMS 402-602. That's the Bible in the masonry industry. So it's actually two documents. The 402 is the code section. The 602 is the specification section. So the 402-602 is a consensus document. It's produced prior to the IBC, and then it's referenced into the IBC and it becomes code. Myself and some of the other IMI directors throughout the country, we sit on some of the code committees and we help write the masonry codes. You see the document there, that's the 2016 TMS. There currently is a 2022 TMS out there that's been published, and we're working on the 2028 TMS 402-602. And that's to help maintain that the codes and standards align with the energy codes and some of the other building codes out there. You know, so if you don't have a copy of the TMS 402-602 and you do a lot of masonry work, shoot me an email. I'll see if I can get you a copy. So next slide, please. When we talk about energy efficiency and masonry walls, there's a lot of different things we have to consider, right? And we look at the per inch values that I have on the screen there. New masonry or normal weight masonry alone has a R value of 0.23. Lightweight CMU or concrete masonry units, we can get a little bit of a higher R value. So you're at 0.31. ACC autoclave units, they're not really manufactured in a great deal in the United States, but there still is a plant in Texas that produces them, and they get an R value of 1.25. You know, and then we have our insulation, whether it's mineral wool, extruded poly, high R, you know, there's different spray foams. So we can add all these different components to our masonry walls, new construction, or even in some case, our restoration projects to increase the R value in our masonry structures. Next slide, please. When we look at a typical new construction cavity wall, there's advantages to thermal mass that masonry gives us. In the energy codes, it gives you an advantage for thermal mass. So when we look at a typical cavity wall of CMU, you know, with our 4-inch masonry veneer, our airspace, 2-inch poly foam, our air barrier, lightweight CMU, and our air film, we're at a total R value of 19.4, and that doesn't even include the thermal mass that we're allowed to add into that. So, you know, there's a lot of misconceptions with masonry, but masonry has a lot of great values and can be a great, it can give you a lot of R value in your walls. You know, the thermal mass comes into play. I don't know if anybody's ever been out west or down south on a really hot day, and at night you walk past a masonry retaining wall or structure, you can actually feel the heat coming back out of the masonry. That's the thermal mass, and that's the advantage to masonry. It has the ability to store heat and then release it over time. Even in interior in a school system, say you have interior CMU, it can create the same R value for you through the thermal mass. It'll give you some benefits. Next slide, please. You know, a lot of different products out there for new construction and insulating CMU walls. These are just some proprietary examples. You can see there's ways to inject foam, continuous insulation on the interior, exterior, some unique shapes like you see in the picture, and then the ACC block that I talked about as well. So a lot of options for new construction with single width CMU. Single width are just one width of wall. There's no backup, but they can meet the energy codes. You know, that's one of the misconceptions about masonry is single width units can't meet the energy codes. Next slide, Kendall. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we can do that, but first we want to review some things: the R value, the U value, and the heat capacity. You know, the R value describes how material insulates under steady state temperature conditions. The U factor tells us how well a material conducts heat under the steady state temperature conditions. So they're kind of opposites of each other. And then the heat capacity, that's the thermal mass that I talked about, how well a material stores and releases heat under transient temperature conditions. So those are three things we consider when we design and figure or look to insulate our single width walls. Next slide. So the code paths for compliance, right? Do we need continuous insulation in our exterior walls? Yes, we do, but only if we follow the prescriptive R value table, right? Next slide, please. There's different ways to do it. If we follow the prescriptive path, that's the most restrictive. That tells us that we need continuous insulation in our walls. If we follow the R value or work at the R value factors, it still does require continuous insulation. But if we go with the U factor, that does not require continuous insulation in our walls. So there's different code paths for code compliance. As you can see on the chart there, it goes from the least restrictive to the most restrictive, bottom to the top. The total building design or the trade-off method is what is typically used in single width, where you can trade within the three different budgets. So for example, the building envelope, we can put more insulation in our walls and less in the roof, or vice versa. We could put more in our roof and less in our walls to meet the energy code. So when we design our single widths, we want to use the total building or the trade-off method. The thing about that is you can't trade outside your budget. So you have to trade within the budget. In other words, you can't trade something from the electrical into the mechanical. Next slide, please. And the way to do that, you know, there's ComCheck. I'm sure everybody's familiar with that. That's a free government program. And we work with a lot of different ComCheck people to help our contractors and designers meet the codes. Next slide. And then this is just an example of something we worked on. You can see this is a one-story single width CMU wall. You can see the areas where we had to inject interior spray foam. We had to add more insulation to the roof. And then the foundation insulation was a little different, but going with that, the trade-off method and using ComCheck, this building was able to pass the you know, the continuous insulation. So masonry does provide options for single width and it can meet the energy codes. Next slide, please. I think that's it. So thank you for your time. You know, I hope you guys have a lot, you know, got a lot of information. If you have any questions, I'm open for questions.
Were there any questions for Tom? Feel free to raise your hand or just take yourself off mute. And if there aren't questions now, we will probably have time at the end too. I guess, Tom, I had one question when you were showing the slide about the masonry cavity and talking about the continuous insulation. Are you seeing a lot of new construction that is, I mean, as we're talking about net zero, you know, carbon emissions and new buildings going up, are you seeing a lot more buildings that are adding additional insulation to the building envelope?
Yeah, you know, and I talked about the TMS 402602, the codes. Mm-hmm. Ohio, Michigan, we build under the 2013 TMS because that references the 2015 IBC, yeah. Right? So okay. with the next iteration of the TMS, which is the 2016 forward, you know, right now the maximum wall cavity by code is 4.5 inches. You can design with a bigger cavity, but you need to have the veneer ties and the veneer specifically engineered. With the iteration of the next 2016 TMS, that cavity is going to expand. So designers are going to be allowed to design and build a 6 5/8 inch wall cavity to allow for more insulation in the walls and still use full bed depth masonry on the exterior and not thin adhered veneers. So you will see some changes once the codes are adopted, I think.
Yeah, and I know we are supposed to have an updated energy code here soon in Michigan.
Right.
Okay.
Tom, I have a question for you.
Yep.
When it comes, I noticed on one of the slides, are there various rebates available right now for applying these things on older buildings and older construction? And then there's kind of a second part to it where, do you see this type of refurbishment being utilized by ESCO organizations or through like promise energy savings contracts and things like that as a way to really provide those promises of the savings?
You know, I'm not sure on either of those, Stephen. I could look
Okay.
that up, but yeah, I could look that up after.
And I apologize, Tom. It's more of how it kind of blends into the work that I do. So there's actually some good pertinence there. If you wouldn't mind following up, I would appreciate that.
Yeah, we could talk after or next week sometime for sure.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Great. Any other questions before we move on to the next presenter?
I had a quick question for Tom. It's Bob Matler. I haven't looked at the lead recently, but are there lead points associated with additional installation for these types of materials?
I think there is. I'll double check on that, Bob, but I'm pretty sure there is.
Yeah, that was a question I had too. So great. Are Bob.
Excuse me. I got one question.
Okay,
What is
go
the
ahead, Tom.
purpose?
Go ahead, Tom.
I'm not familiar with ComCheck. Are they a consultation company?
No, so ComCheck is a free government tool that you can use. It's on the website. That the website that I had showed. It's a free government website, and you can check the you could try and work the parameters of your building into the to the chart, and it'll tell you whether or not it passes or it's code compliant. The thing that I would caution you against is try not to use the you know, the data that's on there. Don't use the fill in the data as for your project. Don't just use the stuff that's on there. You know, make it your own building.
All right. I think we can move on to the next presenter now. Thank you, Tom. And I'm going to hand it over to you, Stephen. After your slides, I'll stop sharing so that you can share your screen.
Sounds great. Thanks. Yeah, so my name is Stephen Crow. I work for Jackson Control. I am the director of Smart Building Platform Enablement. It's kind of a loaded title. What it really means is there's a lot of difficulty in understanding how to transition a building's operations from the standard BMS and the typical operations over to a more digitized, data-driven environment. So my role within Jackson is to really help guide our partners, our customers, and consult with individuals on realistic pathways for them to start actually applying data into their operational pathways and create real kind of migration paths and opportunities for property managers, building owners, and things like that to really start maximizing the use of their building and their existing equipment. And just I appreciate Tom referencing the government tool. It kind of struck me to throw one of my own in here. It's from the Department of Energy. It's called the sftool.gov. There's a link to it in there. I'm not sure which page I sent you guys over to, but if you deal within buildings, it's a really good tool. It allows you to pick a vertical type, a square footage type, and then it will just give you a listing of ideas and energy conservation strategies that have proven evidence to work. So I really recommend anybody in charge of facilities to take a look through there. It's a really helpful resource. So what I wanted to talk a bit about today is retrofitting buildings, but not in this kind of typical way. I want to talk more about leveraging what you already have from a hardware standpoint and finding ways to kind of beef its operation up through software. And I think one of the ways I like to kind of start off by talking about this is I think most people in this group, and I'll give a brief explanation, might know what a VAV is, or a variable air volume box. Basically a box with a little door that opens and closes. And that door that opens and closes is controlled by a controller. The controller has a mechanical actuator that opens and closes the little door. Now, there's only so much I can do to make this mechanism fantastic and amazing. A door is a door, an actuator is an actuator, and that's what it does. It opens and closes. So where the real opportunity to improve these types of mechanical systems lie are within the intelligence that's driving the operations of these systems. So a VAV controller can only be so smart mechanically, but the smarts and the knowledge and the sequencing that you place into that controller, that's where the magic really happens, right? And I think a good kind of pertinent example of that is what we just recently saw in New York. In a standard building, you probably have filters that are completely caked with soot and smoke particles right now, because almost every one of those buildings is going to have had outdoor air being circulated through those filters and circulated through those coils, causing that additional kind of damage and filth. And where I say that we can change that up through software and kind of retrofit without having to change all the parts up is when we start applying some smarts and things from cloud environments or from software, we could have systems that interact with outdoor air weather stations that tell our indoor systems, hey, close these outdoor air dampers because we're pulling in a bunch of smoke. That's the kind of technology improvements that we can get without having to rip out everything and replace it within a building. Kendall, if you wouldn't mind switching to the next slide, I just want to give a quick introduction to our leadership team. So our team out here for Jackson Control is led by Greg Erickson, Alexander Erickson, Nicole Rekka, and John Eckert. This is the team that our kind of purpose right now and part of this presentation is we really feel a responsibility as a distribution arm to expose new technology to people that aren't necessarily having it exposed to them. Because the old way is typically the simpler way, it's the easier way, it's the more understood way, and the new way can wind up being kind of scary. So I actually wanted to show some of what the new potential ways are, because within our organization at Jackson Control, yes, we're a distributor, but we're also a consultant of kind of high level portfolio optimization, BMS standardization, and those types of things. And so we don't want to just kind of distribute technology and talk about technology. We actually want to use it and leverage it within our own portfolio and within our own working mechanisms. So that way it's not such a stretch when we're saying, hey, you can actually work this into your operations because we've already done that. We don't want you to have to understand and figure out how to operationalize all this stuff. So really with that, Kendall, I think I'm going to grab the screen share. And what I wanted to do today for the group is I wanted to go through a few various softwares that we have partnerships with and that we represent. I'm going to bounce around a little bit because I have some of these tabs already ready. And I'm going to start off with a company called Hawken AQ. Hawken AQ is an IAQ monitoring solution at its core from a hardware standpoint. But really, it's a cloud service provider that has data or wireless devices that can supply data very quickly and very easily up to a centralized system for use and usability, and for a nice UI that looks good. And maybe I can minimize this guy. There we go. Hopefully it'll hide that. There we go. All right. And the example I'm pulling up here, and I think part of the coolness of this type of technology is that I was in the office here in Chicago a few weeks back, and somebody mentioned that they'd smelled a natural gas smell. And they were like, yeah, we think we're smelling it every morning, but it's so faint and it kind of goes away. And in the old world of solutions, finding out what's causing that problem would take time, would be difficult, and it would probably be expensive. With the availability of new technology, getting data around this component took about 20 minutes. We were using a new technology called LoRaWAN. It's a communication protocol that is low power, long range. And the reason I bring up the low power is because one of the problems or the issues in the past that people have had with wireless is I don't want to change the batteries. Well, this is representative of data coming from an indoor air quality sensor from Hawken that we placed within the office. It took about 20 minutes to do that. We put buttons to turn it on, and we had all the data flow telling us and validating that, yes, in fact, in the morning when the unit started up when it was colder, we were getting a little increase of VOCs and PM particles. And the reason I scrolled down to the bottom of this is I think it's important to mention that as we start looking at wireless technology, this sensor was in my home at my actual house for about 3 years before I brought it into this office. And our battery level is still very high, and we have no need to replace that. So we're going to get another 7 to 8 years out of this sensor before we have to deal with it. So this is just an example of there was kind of an odd problem of, hey, we're getting a smell and an ability to really quickly understand through some data whether or not that's real and if there's any viability to that. So taking it kind of a next level or the next step, we decided to apply a analytic solution to our office as well. It's a small it's a small office, so we don't get a lot of amazing data out of it, but I think it's important that we can show how quickly, when you're looking at data as opposed to looking at BMS or control systems, you can get better strategic decisions. And part of what Resolute Building Intelligence does is they apply fault detection diagnostics or rules that are going to be across your system to help indicate when things are out of energy parameter or comfort parameter. In this case, it's talking about a deadband issue where you should have a wider range between your heating and cooling set points. And it's telling us that if we do that, we'll be able to get some reductions. Now, where this kind of stuff also becomes important is communication. And every one of the platforms that we represent have some sort of a communication portal because that's incredibly important. And with Resolute, they have something called an action center where we're able to put additional links. And since we're able to put additional links, we can also make recommendations from a distributor standpoint on things that might be needed within the building and make it very simple for people to click in, see a quotation, understand if it's something that they want to go forward with, make that purchase, and get that issue resolved. So there's a lot of good interoperability that starts happening when you're able to do things in a cloud environment. And that's part of why I think there's such a large push from a lot of the organizations to go that direction. And we'll kind of talk a little bit more about that. Now, these are great solutions, but Hawken doesn't really provide you with action. Hawken's providing you with the data and with the outputs to really supply you with some information. Resolute is doing something similar, but it does a much better job at creating very high level strategies and abilities to maintain those strategies. We can take it a step further to another layer of digitization, and that's with one of our partners in Code Labs. Code Labs runs a cloud-based operating system. And when I mentioned that issue within New York, something like a Code Labs operating system would prevent that type of issue from happening, where you would have built into that smarts sequencing that would say, if we have smoke from fires nearby, let's not pull that smoke into the building. Let's close all these dampers and reduce our demand. Part of the other beauty of the cloud-based OS is that they have a lot of computing power. They're not on premises, these live in servers. And if they lived on-prem, they wouldn't have anywhere near the capabilities that they have to do the jobs that are being asked. And it's almost as if these cloud-based operating systems are really, what they're really trying to do is automate the things that the BMS alone doesn't really automate that well. The BMS is a great tool, but there are a lot of failures. And I think a lot of that's been proven as we've moved beyond just trying to keep people comfortable, and we moved into actually wanting to retain sustainability, have indoor air quality, and those types of things. Now, one of the other benefits to working with a cloud-based operating system is that we can enable APIs, which are basically the ability for something to talk to each other. What makes an iPhone so amazing isn't necessarily how well it can make phone calls. It's that I can grab my AirPods, plug them into my ear, and it works with that phone. Or I can sit down in a vehicle and my phone automatically recognizes that there's a Bluetooth connection and it starts ingesting that information and makes my music available on the car. With APIs, and what Code Labs has done is developed a very nice catalog of APIs, is it makes it easy to say, you know what, I want to have like my elevator bank represented within my operating system so I can use that information and have it work with my HVAC system and my occupancy to create even more savings. We can start looking at where your elevator banks are sitting and have them positioned better based on things even as silly as what's your cafeteria menu or how many people are working today, where are they logging in. Potentially you have a Siemens Desigo system that's controlling your fire alarms, and it's a little antiquated and you're not getting as much out of it as you need to. You can enhance that with a tool like this. And where I think it gets really cool in my world is They've also created work order integrations along with some of the other CMMS corporations. And the reason they've done this is so that way we can continue keeping the process automated by allowing a output from an operating system to feed directly into a work order management system like BuiltSpace. Now, I'm not going to click into this integration, but I do happen to have a quick instance up of BuiltSpace. BuiltSpace it's a much better version of an asset management system, specifically around HVAC mechanical repairs, and it even has a very big application in cleaning through QR coding, geolocation, making sure people are at the spot where they say they are when they're making the repair. Part of the beauty of things like a BuiltSpace is it allows you to really customize things that are going to be going out to your team in very simple ways and verify things that are taking place. And part of the issue with even presenting this stuff is I'm looking at a lot of things right now. The real value to this stuff is that you shouldn't be looking at almost any of this, really at almost any time. These should be weekly, possibly daily reviews of things like your data. And then the tools themselves should be automating a lot of these processes. And that's kind of where Jackson, where we put our hand into support. Is that in and of themselves, none of these solutions are perfect or work, amazingly. But when combined correctly and for the right use case and for the right KPI, there's certain things that are going to be a lot better than others. And so I'm going to stop sharing the screen. The last thing I wanted to do just really quickly, because I do think it is a very cool new kind of technology, is I want to show briefly some of the LoRa devices that we're working with, because the application of LoRa is incredibly simple and it's incredibly effective. So we have two different hubs currently that we're working with. One is a LoRa gateway provided by Siemens. The other is one provided by Hawken AQ. The way the system works to implement these things and get that beautiful dashboard and all that stuff is you simply plug the gateway into your router or you connect it into Wi-Fi. And then you just place sensors where you want them. This is a temperature and humidity sensor. This is a door trip sensor. There's VOC sensors, motion, light, all those things. So if there's ever been something where you've been curious about a condition or an environmental activity, or you wanted to add alerting or monitoring for CO2 or for leaks, it's no longer a case where you have to get a massive proposal and create this work order system and manage it. Today, you can take those devices and very quickly apply them and get the data fed up to your systems that will make them smarter and allow them to use that data to operate more effectively and efficiently. So I think I'm getting pretty close to time, Kendall.
Yeah, I
okay.
was close to interrupting you, but I was like, I think Steven's wrapping this up on his own. So
Yep, I was ready to go off on rants for another 20 minutes about how we can do better, but I'm gonna hold off on that. So
well, and I'm
thank you very
glad
much.
that we're recording this and that we're going to share it and with everybody and put it on YouTube, because yeah, there was a lot of good information there that I know myself would want to go back and reference again. So, but yeah, before we move on to Jana, just wanted to let anyone who has questions for Stephen right now, ask them. Also, Stephen, could you drop your contact info in the chat if anyone wants to reach out to you after?
There we go.
And were there any questions right now?
Nope,
Yeah, Steve, this is, go
We
ahead.
might talk about Kone later, and if you interact with Dude Solutions, there's a few questions that you raised, so I took notes.
Absolutely, Al. Yeah, and I'm glad you bring up Dude Solutions because they are in the mix. So there's a lot of them right now, and that's why it's really tough to navigate.
10-4. All right, thank you.
Bob,
Bob, I
did
think
you
you
have
had a question?
Yeah.
I pretty much had the same question. I think you had mentioned 3 of these different software companies, Resolute, Cody, and then another one. And it sounded like you were maybe not recommending Cody, but seems like was that what you were suggesting, that out of these 3 that Cody was the strongest?
No, they're very different. And that's where, Bob, we might have to talk about it further because code is more of an operating system. So code is kind of saying you're paying for a supervisor from a Tritium or from a Siemens or from a Honeywell. They're saying we have a much better supervisor system and we want to apply that and kind of take over the supervisor role.
Okay,
The other products are more of an enhancement for what you kind of currently have on there and really just pulling more data. And then where it gets a little complex is that there's kind of a cost level that goes to each of them, right? There's the system that does everything for you at one cost, and the system that gives you just information at another cost, and a lot of things in between.
Hard to navigate right now, but thanks.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Stephen, and thanks for the questions. And I think we are ready to move on to Jana's presentation. And then at the end, we can ask any additional questions of any of the presenters. So Jana, welcome. Let me pull up my screen and pull up your slides.
Great, thank you. And Tom and Stephen, glad you guys went first. I really enjoyed hearing your presentation, so thank you so much. We can go next slide. I'll just kind of, I have had a chance to meet a number of you before. Got a chance to see some of you yesterday morning at the great event, so appreciate that. My name's Jana Lake. I'm the president and CEO of 3R Sustainability. Just to give you a little bit of kind of the background of who we are and kind of how we got to this point. Started 30 some years ago as an assessment body. So really, tied in with kind of ISO management system types of thinking. Back in about 2006, started working with the USGBC and GBCI as one of their lead partners, their lead review partners, because of that assessment and review type of skill set. And then in 2015, really said, gosh, okay, now we've looked at thousands of buildings around the world. We've got a lot to be able to contribute to the discussion around how do we design, build, and operate buildings much more efficiently. So we started 3R first as a subsidiary and eventually completely spun off into its own separate company. And now we're the ones actually doing the both the built environment and corporate sustainability consulting and the assessment and assurance services. So proud to have become a woman-owned business in 2019 and certified B Corp and all those kinds of things because we really believe in, kind of walking the talk. If you go to the next slide then, Kendall. The different kind of scope areas that we touch, very much from helping an organization figure out what it is that they want to do, what ties best with their business model and with what their stakeholders are expecting and asking of them. So from strategy through planning and reporting, getting into an organization's supply chain and helping them really understand whether it's from a corporate standpoint or again, from a building standpoint, what are you buying? Who are you buying it from? What kind of an environmental impact does that have? What kind of risk does it perhaps, institute into your overall supply chain? We've really expanded, especially over these last couple of years, a lot into the greenhouse gas and climate space, climate risk, helping an organization understand what their greenhouse gas inventory is, how to reduce that environmental impact. And then, really kind of how that all comes together from a people standpoint, from the building standpoint, and really from an organization's operations overall to make sure that they can really drive performance and in some cases go for certification if that's what makes sense, because that's kind of a nice third-party view on, that stamp of approval. So when you've set some big goals for yourself, it can be really nice and have a lot of value to actually get a certification for it to say, look, we wanted to pursue, either a net zero certification or a science-based target or a LEED certification, really to demonstrate to others that commitment that we have. The next slide. This just talks a little bit about, some of the kind of skills and expertise that we do bring to the table when we work with organizations. Being in that CDP accredited provider, if anybody is in that space of being asked to report to CDP, which is your greenhouse gas inventory and kind of everything you do to try to manage that and reduce your overall footprint. We also work with EcoVadis, which is a supply chain assessment. So, helping an organization and increasingly even, a sports team, a building owner really start to understand what kind of impacts they have within their supply chain. And again, how do you identify risk? We were talking just briefly before the call here, we were talking about local sourcing, right? And how that could be something that can really helping improve an organization's resilience in their supply chain. It gives you much greater understanding of kind of where your materials are coming from. If you're going to have access to those materials, it greatly reduces the environmental impact or carbon footprint of those materials. So, the kind of how you interact with and make your decisions from a sourcing standpoint really can drive a lot of business value for you. So we really interact a lot with organizations such as, Stephen and Tom's, to be able to help an organization use the data that they have, oftentimes get better quality data, and help display how that really is helping them achieve the goals that they have, both internally from a management standpoint, but also externally to be able to show how, as a part of somebody else's supply chain, for your customers, what you're doing to, in fact, help them achieve their goals too. We've been getting increasingly as well into the waste certification. So a number of people, I'm sure in this call, are very familiar with True Waste and the True Zero Waste certification, how to achieve that, what are some things that you can do starting all the way from the supply chain and sustainable procurement on through actual use and then disposal, ideally through reuse, recycling, doing everything we can to try to keep waste out of landfills. Next slide. When we work with an organization, whether it's a corporation or a building owner, a lot of it starts right up front with the strategic planning. What are you trying to achieve? What are your goals? What is your business model? How are you going to realize value for this internally for yourself, as well as, again, kind of your tie with your customers and your other stakeholders. And then we become that partner. So, let's do the planning up front. Let's set the strategy. It might be building certification. It might be a net zero target. But then let's really help you figure out a prioritized plan to achieve that. And, then we are your partner in helping you to do that. So oftentimes we, kind of consider ourselves the additional capability and capacity for an organization to address sustainability. And then, through implementation, that's kind of setting you up for doing some internal reporting and external reporting perhaps. But the most important role to me of reporting is how that's used in management review. So reporting gives you a good sense of how am I actually progressing toward my goals? Where do I have opportunities then for continual improvement? And how is that going to continue to drive performance for my organization? The next slide, Kendall. Oh, good. That was it. I wanted to keep it short in case there were any questions or questions for any of the other presenters as well. So thank you.
Thanks, Jana. Any questions?
I always have questions. Do you mind if I ask another one?
Go ahead, Stephen.
Jana, when you talk about waste, it's one of the aspects that I don't think a lot of property owners think about. And a lot of them have kitchens and things like that. Is there a push towards organizations like creating their own kind of composting areas and things like that for that type of food waste? Or is there like health issues with that?
No, absolutely. Especially when you're talking waste, right? One of the very first things to think about is our donation programs. So especially, Al, I'm sure that you guys are actively doing this. How do you partner with others so that the food that you may have at the end of an event, if properly stored, can get to communities in need? And so how do we look at it in its entirety and say, okay, this could potentially, be directed to someone right off the bat? Then there's more of that kind of back of house production waste type, right? So that might be handled with, for example, a biodigester. What can we do to be able to compost and, really manage the food waste so it does not end up in a landfill? And then there's more of that front of house, right? So, what do we do to properly set up the right bins, have the right signage so that whether it's a fan or a building occupant, they know what goes where, right? Is this something that can be reused? Is this something that we can actually compost? Or is it something that in fact needs to go to landfill? And how do we continue to reduce that landfill amount?
Thank you for that. I almost want to have another conversation with you, Jana, because that opens up the whole world of when I watch some video of somebody saying, this is all in the recycling bin. This doesn't belong in a program in 5 states, and they won't recycle this unless you're in Colorado, and this, that, and the other. And it's very interesting.
I'm a big fan of putting pictures of what you can and cannot do, and right. So if you're going to have a recycling bin, like put a picture of these are the things that you actually can recycle. If you are to the point of having a compost bin, put the picture there too, right? Sometimes there are now compostable, serviceware options and plates and those kinds of things. I know Al is a big leader in this space, right? It's like, do everything you can first to figure out how to make it a compostable option. And then, let's do the recycling. And then at the very last, let's think about from a landfill standpoint.
No, all right. Thank you, Jana. Yes. And we make sure that everything that we can make compostable, we do, especially out for our food courts and things like that, to make it very easy. And again, you're right on the pictures. Or we even have little seminars for our employees and our subcontractors to say, what would you put in this bin? And we get their mindsets, and then we either change our pictures, add pictures, or change their minds a little bit.
Yeah. Right.
But,
There's a lot of education around that to be done.
Yeah, but Steve, yeah, the biodigester, yeah, we did test one recently, but even right now, even though it didn't quite pass for us, we are part of a plan or a program. One of my 40 yarders is just for compost, and it goes to a farm just north of Lansing where they make some great black dirt for it. They make it available to us, but it's all right. We don't need it. We don't want it. We let other people have it. We just know that our stuff's going to the right place. And I know, I think you had even heard this, Kendall, from Kristen, that the city is looking into possibly changing the old Detroit thermal trash burner area into where they're going to do composting.
Oh man, imagine the community gardens that could pop up with having free compost locally available. I think that's really impressive. I did not know Huntington Place was doing all of this kind of stuff towards sustainability. I'm gonna have to take a tour.
So we're at 50%,
absolutely.
and it's coming. The tours are
There's
coming.
the tour.
Are they? Okay, because yeah, I'd love to come see a tour of what you guys have done.
So we're
If I
at
can-
50% right now, diversion, and Kendall's trying to help me get a lot higher.
Good. That's awesome. You absolutely do want to get a tour, Stephen. I'll send you a link to a tour that I know that's going on in August. But it's very impressive. Just, from a building standpoint, from an operations standpoint, Al's really doing some great things there.
That's why I love groups like this, is because I mean that has nothing to do with what we do, but I think one of the coolest things about this environment is that there's so many verticals that you can apply different ideas for. And we're finally breaking down some of the silos where previously it was, well, you got to go talk to my waste management director about that, and you got to talk to my, facilities guy about that, and this, that, and the other. It's nice to hear that we're seeing this kind of full scope where, people are talking operations at every level and waste.
Yep.
You have to have those cross-functional groups to make it all happen, right? I often talk with a lot of students that want to get into sustainability, and they're all looking for that job that says, sustainability director, sustainability
Yeah.
manager. And I said, listen, what you need to do is find an organization that embraces sustainability, and you need to
Yep.
go in any role that you can to make a difference, and then get actively engaged. That's how we're actually going to achieve sustainability goals. If you think that it's the one person that's got that hat on that's
Yep.
going to be responsible for it all, it just isn't set up for success.
Yeah, well, I'm glad we got on the topic of waste too, because that's kind of what stood out to me as well. And even yesterday after the Detroit Energy Challenge breakfast, we try to make those waste-free events with compostable utensils and plates. And so I was on trash duty. We always have somebody or one of our volunteers. So drove it over with Al to Huntington Place, and we were able to weigh it and see how much we diverted from the landfill and kind of track that. And Al's able to throw it in with the rest of the compostables at Huntington Place. So,
Well, and
but,
it's not impossible, right? It's like changing operational styles can be
Yep.
an upheaval, but it's not impossible. And
No.
it's, people just don't like change and discomfort sometimes. So
Yep.
it'll be a lot less comfortable if none of us have electricity because our grid is down because we haven't solved any of this energy problem. And then we'll all be willing to make reductions.
Yep. Nope. And Connie and I often are like, do we want to take on yet another element of the carbon emission discussion? We're, focusing on energy and water and transportation, but solid waste is a huge part of it. And so we are increasingly kind of looking at that as a topic that we bring into this whole conversation when we're talking about our buildings. So yeah, and we've got some great partners, nonprofit Green Living Science being one of them, who's very active in Detroit, running some of the programs around recycling and waste reduction. So,
Awesome.
but yeah,
Yeah,
this was a great.
I was just
Oh,
gonna
go ahead,
say,
Bob.
the Green Task Force yesterday really kind of concentrated on the
Yep.
waste. Kendall, were you on that call? I didn't see
I
it.
was, yeah,
Okay, yeah, so that was interesting too.
yeah. And I'm gonna put the link to the Eventbrite that Jana mentioned. I actually got
that'd be
that
great.
yesterday too, that it's USGBC that's hosting that, I think. USGBC Detroit.
Detroit.
I'm gonna
Great.
try to sign up for that too. So I get a tour
August
of-
18th, I believe, Kendall.
on August 18th. Yep. So,
Good.
all right.
I'm
Well,
there.
we are at 1 o'clock. So I want to make sure I respect everybody's time. Feel free to stay on if you'd like, but otherwise I'm going to stop recording now, and thank you to our presenters and everybody who attended, and I'll share this recording as soon as we have it uploaded to YouTube.
Great.
Yeah, thanks so
Thanks.
much